For our third stencil technique, we're going to be using an embossing dabber again, only this time we're going to change it up after the fact. So this time, instead of using a traditional embossing powder, we're going to use a product called Sticky Embossing Powder. This product is essentially a powdered glue, and when you hit it with heat from your heat tool, it melts and turns into an adhesive that you can then use with foil, glitter, or flock, just to name a couple things that you can do with it. So I'm going about this process the same way as I did with our embossing powder. So I applied my stencil to my cardstock. This time I'm using black cardstock. I secured the stencil in place so that it didn't shift around while I was trying to apply my embossing ink. I'm using the embossing dabber again here to put that ink through the holes in my stencil and get a good coverage on every one of those exposed areas. Once I've got a good coverage, I can go ahead and remove the stencil. Keep in mind that you do want to treat your surface with an anti-static powder tool before you apply the ink. That way your embossing ink your embossing powder doesn't stick where you don't want it to. So here is the sticky embossing powder, and I am just pouring that on the same way that I would with a normal embossing powder. Something to keep in mind is if you want better results, mine are a little splotchy here, you can definitely work in smaller areas. I did the whole stencil at one time, and that means that some of my embossing ink was a little less wet and juicy than other parts, which means that I didn't get the best transfer with my sticky embossing powder, which in turn means I don't get the best coverage with my foil. If you want better results, you can definitely work in smaller areas and just do them individually, and then come back and do the next area separately. You can see here I'm just using my heat tool to melt that embossing powder. It turns clear, so that's how you know that it's ready to go. You want to immediately place your foil on top, smooth it so that it just touches and is secured to the cardstock, but don't press hard. Since this adhesive is still hot, it can be smushed and your design can be affected if you push too hard too quickly. Set it aside and let it cool, and then once it's nice and cool, you can go ahead and burnish it or just rub it to make sure that you get a good foil transfer. Now, I did find that this actually works really well if you put it through an embossing or die cut machine using your embossing plate settings. It may smush your design out a little bit, but I think it's worth it because you get a really good foil transfer and it looks really smooth and pretty. So that's another option if you'd like to try that route too.